Gabe from Chicago. Michael, can you expand on what you were saying about the United States being better than Europe in a multicultural perspective? I have a sense this is true, but I've also spoken with people that have said the opposite. Well, look, I actually think, and someone who is very convincing to me on this is Bhaskar Sunkara. I think that there is actually going to need to be a tempered leftist but coherent defense of the melting pot as actually a very, in some ways, very defensible idea. And I think that, and again, we're talking on a relative scale here. So please don't be like, whatever. I hate having to use these caveats. America is white supremacist in its DNA. It's structurally racist, and racism has been expressed in different varieties from everybody from, in fact, Irish and Italian people to Jewish people to certainly Chinese, Mexican, so on. And the government we have in place now is an overtly racist one. However, there are more countervailing forces in American society in terms of a broad multicultural perspective as a base than European countries from every read I have, including like even things that a guy like Macron can say and be considered like a liberal cosmopolitan leader and tell like Africans to get over it. A democratic president in the modern age couldn't say that. There's a different tradition and context. I think the other thing that's also interesting too is I'm not an essentialist, period. So I think these distinctions are arbitrary, but in some like incredibly crude sense, one can say like, France is French and it's European and we have this history, of course, negating all of its colonialism and extraction and reality of its multi-part identity today. But nobody, you can't even make a pretend case like that for the United States. The United States is not a European country. The United States is a European, Native American, African country. The United States literally is a global melting pot, multi-geographic, multi-identity country in a way that is, in fact, just literally numerically pretty distinct. And so that leads to different bases in politics and different, not to say that Europe can't overcome these things as well, but I just don't see the same sophistication or history from a positive perspective on race issues and discourse in Europe that I do see at times in the United States.
We had Gerald Horn on. Brendan, do you remember what we had him on for?
Yes, it was a book.
Yep, you are.
Europe.
It's a book about the slave trade.
Yeah, so I read a book, The Counter-Revolution of 1776 by him too, and there's a part where people, I think it was South Carolina, were saying like, you're bringing way too many black slaves over here. You're going to outnumber the white people, and we're going to lose control of our white supremacist country.
Right.
And that's what happened. So like it is white supremacist country, but it's not like there are people that wanted to send all the black people to Liberia. That also failed, right? We are just basically because of failures and greed of slavers. Yes. We're a more diverse country than we could have been.
And at our inception, again, I don't accept an essentialist position, but anywhere, but just we are literally not. From the foundation of this country, in an incredibly destructive, genocidal, and slave-creating one, we're literally a multiracial, multi-identity country from the very beginning. So you can't even do, Germans can do an imagined past where they were just themselves, right? To build on a racism narrative now. You can't even functionally do that here.
That doesn't mean people don't do it, though.
Yeah, of course they do
man.
it. Of course they do it. Of course.
I kind of floated some of these ideas on our show this week, and our guest shot down pretty quickly. He's like, you know what? It's bad everywhere. We're bad in a different way than Europe is bad. But, you can't write off the settler colonialism that our country was founded on.
But nobody is.
And well, yeah, I'm just saying, it's bad in a different way. It's kind of like apples and oranges at this point. I don't know.
On a relative scale, no. Because even just what he was saying about and they're going to gun for it, but birthright citizenship, Italy doesn't have it. the discourse there in a way that is totally mainstream about who is and isn't Italian is different than it is here, in the sense that the perspective that is amplified by Trump and disputed by even like very mainstream mediocre political people here is like a consensus there. Like, that's not a terribly controversial thing to say in Italy. That is here, and we should build on that and recognize that that's more room to work with. That doesn't excuse the reality or our history. That's, again, I get frustrated by that kind of pushback because that just isn't, like, of course, we're a settler-colonial country, as I've said, and we have more room to work from right now than Europe. I mean, and Europe needs to catch up.
Both have a lot of work to do. I'll leave it at that.
Everybody and everything has a lot of work to do.
I hate to keep bringing up George Orwell, but I think I mentioned this, where there were GIs going to the UK during World War II, and some of them were pressuring British clubs to start imposing this color segregation. And Orwell's like, we need to raise publicity about this because we don't have a color problem in the UK. But then he goes on in a parenthetical to say, it's not because any inherent virtue of British people, as evidenced by what we're doing in India, right? Like, because they literally had color bars in Indian, clubs there. It's just that basically the historical circumstances haven't been there to create it, right? And they created a different sort of thing where, like, you have a different sort of nationalism, like you were saying, in all Europeans, and we have here, which has been negotiated over and over again, from like not only 1776 but also the 1860s and on.
And it varies historically. I mean, obviously, like, as an example, a lot of people like James Baldwin went to live in France during like legal apartheid in the United States, and conversely, France's model of like literal skin color is secondary to complete cultural, all-encompassing colonialism. At certain times made it a nicer place to go because they would be like, all right, well, you speak French, so okay, sure. In today's context, France is totally primitive on civil rights questions, I think, relative to, like, I remember like Bashkar was joking me about that, a recent visit he said to France. He's like, France needs like a civil rights movement that they have not had in a, very clear way.